So my name is Luke Hassevoort. I'm with the Michigan Abolitionist Project and Hope for the Voiceless. MAP, Michigan Abolitionist Project, is an organization that formed in Grand Rapids back in like 2010. And we work mainly in professional training and education, so trying to equip like first responders and people who are going to come in contact with trafficking victims, how to identify and then get services for trafficking victims. We do community engagement things. We try and get people who are interested in volunteering and using their passions and talents to fight human trafficking. We try and connect them with ways to do that. And then Hope for the Voiceless is our creative projects department, and so through that we make videos. We have a magazine that we create. It's called Unbound, and you guys can actually check it out on our website if anybody is interested. But come on in. Nope, you're fine. So I've been interested in human trafficking and doing research and doing anti-trafficking work for about 3 years. I currently live in Detroit, and I'm going to Wayne State to get my master in social work. And just a couple things before I kind of like dive into the presentation. I want to ask you guys to think critically about the things that I'm saying and don't just accept them for fact or whatever. A lot of this stuff is like my opinion and things that I've kind of gathered over a lot of research, but that doesn't mean everything that I'm saying is 100% true and that it can't be questioned, because I think that it should be, and that's how we make progress and move towards better ideas and a better society. I also want to say I'm not going to be intentionally graphic and try and like shock people, but some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is intense and I know can be triggering for folks. So if you need to step out, please feel free. Don't feel obligated to stay in the room. I know that Spring Arbor has staff on site to talk with people, and if you want to talk to me afterwards, please feel free to come up and do that. So I noticed, and this is because this is what I told them that the presentation was going to be on. In the little bulletin thing, little agenda thing, my presentation is titled Living in a Culture of Exploitation. And when I was putting all this together last week, I didn't like that title anymore because I don't like the fact that we're just living in a culture of exploitation. I don't want to get up here and just talk to you about all the ways that our society kind of sucks and hurts people. I want to be able to give you some hope and some tools, hopefully, to respond to a culture of exploitation so that we can change it and live in a better culture. So I'd like to start by talking about stories. I think that as people we identify really well with stories. They help us organize information, they help us share information, help us influence other people. They help us build our identities. I think one of the reasons that we like to read books is because we like to find a place to fit in. We like characters that we can identify with. Our lives really can be mapped out into stories. We develop across our lifespan. We have conflict, we have resolution, all those exciting things. And like I said, I think stories help us kind of find our place. When you read a story that you really resonate with, it can give you insight and kind of, help you figure out your own life and things that you're going through. I also think that it helps us group each other. So when we tell stories, some stories are told about this group of people and other stories are told about this group of people. And the story that you resonate more with maybe will help you find that in-group or that group that you feel like you're a part of. And I think this can be a good thing, and I think this can also be a really harmful and destructive thing. So I like to use the example of Tom's shoes. Marketing is all about telling people stories because they're trying to get you to buy something. They want you to purchase their product, and so they tell you stories about what you can be if you buy their product. So I'm saying this hypocritically because I wear Tom's all the time, so I'm not knocking Tom's shoes or anything like this. But the story that they try and sell us is that by wearing Tom's shoes and buying Tom's shoes, we become like this socially conscious hipster 20-30 something who's like helping kids get shoes in like impoverished areas, and that's really great. And when I buy Tom's shoes, I like to think of myself like this guy, like I'm doing something good for the world and I'm helping people. In reality, I feel I'm a little bit more like this guy. I'm just kind of wearing my Tom's shoes around the city, and it doesn't really do a whole lot for a lot of people. But we like the story, and I think that Tom's does actually help people, so buy their shoes, whatever. But I think it's a good example of I'm much more like this guy who's not necessarily helping anybody just by wearing these shoes, and not so much like the other guy who's visiting these countries and actually interacting with people. And so the question that I always like to ask is, what if the story being told about us is a lie? What if the story is being told by somebody who doesn't care about us, and the story is being told about us? What does that do to us? What do you guys think? Yes, I can give an example. So I think when we look at like mainstream media, we're given a lot of concepts about who we're supposed to be and what type of person we're supposed to be. But a lot of those things aren't necessarily true, and I think a lot of times it can be destructive. So I think, for example, about like, what does it mean to be a man in today's society?
Masculine, tough, don't show emotions.
Tough, don't show emotions. Okay. Do you feel like those are common stories that we're told about what it means to be a guy? But I think those are lies, right? I don't think that's true. And I think that's really harmful. So these stories that are told about us, they shape us. They're everywhere. They have a lot of influence on our lives. They have a lot of influence in how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others. And marketers and people in advertising and media, they understand this. And they prey on it. I read this article last week in The Atlantic, and it was about a study that was released. And they looked at so in this, for example, women feel ugliest on Mondays and Wednesdays. So this is for targeted advertising, like on the internet and stuff. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, they're going to like blast you with advertisements for like beauty products because they think that you're feeling ugly on those days. They're preying on you because you're vulnerable. I don't know if they've done these same studies for men, but I'm sure there are days of the week where I'm getting like certain ads on Facebook because I'm feeling vulnerable that day, and these people are trying to exploit me and sell me whatever it is that they're trying to sell me. I think a lot of times too in media we see objectification happening. People are turned into objects, and when we're objectified, we're dehumanized. We no longer are given the space to have thoughts and abilities, to have hopes and dreams. All that is kind of taken away from us and we become something, become a commodity that is just used by other people for certain things. Businesses maybe see us as just consumers. We're consumers. I'm at a social work internship right now, and we talk about the people that we serve as consumers, which feels a little weird to me. I know that we call them that because they're consuming the services that we have, but it feels like a bit of an objectification, honestly, when we call them consumers, because we're reducing a whole human being to just somebody who's consuming services for homeless people. I want to show you a really quick video.
Hey babe, looking for a good time?
So that's an example of dehumanizing somebody in advertising, right? So we have Axe basically saying that because their body spray smells so nice, any woman is like that close to, prostituting herself on the street and trying to get in the car with this guy. And I think that when this type of objectification happens, it's more like sexualization. And the American Psychological Association did a study in 2010, and they looked at the effects of media sexualization on young girls in our society. So they defined sexualization as sexuality being inappropriately imposed on people. And so I think the most common example that we can think of in terms of this is children. That children sometimes are sexualized in media and advertising. Maybe not like really young kids, but like kids like 12 and 13 years old, where they're not really making that choice to be sexual, but somebody is posing them in a way or displaying them in a way that is sexual in nature. And sexualization is also, in kind of a broader sense, when somebody is no longer defined by the human being that they are, but their sexuality and their ability to give or receive sexual services or whatever. And I think this is really destructive too. I think we see this more and more in advertising, that people are broken down into just their body parts. And so we see sex, sex sells. That's kind of the common thing. Like that's an adage that we hear about marketing a lot. And it's true. I think that they try and use sex and people's sexuality and the sexual parts of people to sell things. And so they're commoditizing that part of a human being, but neglecting the fact that that is a human being, that's a whole person, that's not just somebody with breasts or something like that to be used in a way to sell something. Have any of you seen the Dove Evolution commercial before? Yeah? Okay. We're going to watch it really quick. What do you guys think of that? What are your initial thoughts?
She was more beautiful in the beginning.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just think how flawed our perception of reality is, if that's the case.
Yeah. Because all of these images that are being fed to us that tell us how we're supposed to look aren't even real. Nobody looks that way. Have you guys heard the quote from Cindy Crawford that Cindy Crawford wishes she looked like Cindy Crawford? Because she sees herself in these magazines and she's like, I don't look anything like that, when she wakes up in the morning. Does anybody else have thoughts about that video?
It seems like we're not even attracted to humans anymore. Like, if
Yeah.
that's what we're attracted to, it's not really, it's not human.
Right. I think a lot of times what this can lead to is self-objectification. So we see these images in magazines and on commercials and on TV that we are representations of beauty and that we're supposed to try and achieve and attain and compare ourselves to. And so getting back to what you said earlier, can I give you an example of when is the story a lie? I think every image you see in every magazine probably is a lie that's being told to you about how somebody looks or how somebody is supposed to look. To me, self-objectification is just one of the scariest and most common things that we see, because really all of these objectification, sexualization, and self-objectification is a reduction of a human being. So they're no longer, a human being who lives their life, who has family and friends. They're just a little part, and they're reduced to that single part. And usually, it's not a good part. We don't really reduce somebody into a positive thing. It's usually a negative thing. I think about this in terms of weight all the time. Like people will focus on I'm too fat. I'm not thin enough, and that's like what consumes them. They think about that all the time. They forget all the other qualities that they have, and that's not even to say that your weight is a good or bad quality. But you forget about the positive things that you can hold on to in your life, and as you try and embrace just who you are as a human being. And so I think all of these are reductionistic of a person, and I think that's a violent act. I think when we reduce somebody to just a component or a part, that's a really violent thing that we do to others and to ourselves. And so self-objectification then is the process of objectification where we're not seen by others as something to be used and bought and sold and that sort of thing if we're talking about trafficking, but we see ourselves as something to be used. We see ourselves as objects. And so we we stop hoping and we stop dreaming and we stop living and loving and having emotions and feelings, and we kind of just isolate ourselves and we become this just little thing. So I want to, So the APA, now going back to this, the APA did this research on the effects of objectification in media on young girls. And so they looked at girls who had been exposed to a lot of media that was objectifying and sexualizing and all of that, and then compared that to girls who had less exposure to that. And what they found is that these things were most commonly, or high exposure to objectifying media was most commonly linked to eating disorders, low self-esteem, and depression, which are three of the biggest mental health issues that we see in female populations. I'm going to say that we probably would see a lot of these same things in male populations if the study had been done on young men and what their, the effects of media sexualization on them. But the truth is, men aren't objectified in media nearly as often as women. Women are objectified much more often. Men are increasingly being objectified in media, I think, but it's still not, it's not at the same level. And so, unfortunately, what happens for men is that we are exposed to all of these images of women that aren't true, that are lies. And so then we begin to see our sisters and our mothers and our friends through a distorted lens. And so I kind of want to revisit this question: what is considered physically attractive? For what would be considered physically attractive in a man? Based on the media portrayals of people. We'll narrow it down to that. Yeah?
Visually, what is considered attractive in a man's shoulders are broader than his hips, so
Mhm.
it creates a V shape.
Like Superman. What's that?
I was just saying the swimmer's body.
Swimmer's body, yeah. We all want to look like Mike Phelps. Maybe. Why not? He's a good guy. Maybe. I don't know. This is a distraction. I have no idea. Don't see, critically analyze what I just said there and then do what you will with it. Anybody else?
Like a six-pack.
Uh-huh. What about skin color? Tan?
Lack of acne.
Lack of acne?
Minimal hair on his chest.
Minimal hair on his chest?
Slick hair.
Slick hair? Uh-huh. How many men look like those things? Not most. Six men, or 6%. I said probably closer to 6 men, yeah. And what about for women? What do we see as like a physically beautiful, representation of a woman?
Hourglass.
Hourglass.
Long hair.
Long hair? What color hair? Blonde. Often, yeah? What color skin?
Either tan or pale.
Tan or pale? Usually not like African American or Middle Eastern or Asian or
Really quite tan or really pale.
yeah. We like hold up being white as like the standard of beauty, which is like what the heck? That's not something you can change about yourself, so why should that be an ideal? What about breast size? Is that something? Yeah? I mean, I know it's a thing, but yeah? I mean, like the different shapes of our body are valued differently. And that changes over time too, Like what's considered physically attractive now maybe wasn't 100 years ago or 300 years ago. We don't really need to analyze those, I guess, because we have enough problems on our plate right now. Oh, we just did that. So I think that when we do this, when we reduce people, we other them. And to me, othering is a process of setting something or someone apart as being fundamentally different than ourselves. We can do this with an individual person. We can do this with groups of people. We can do it with a race of people or a gender of people. When we're talking about men and women, like what are qualities of men and what are qualities of women, we usually split them into two different groups, don't we? Like there's no overlap between qualities and characteristics that men and women have, as if they're two just like, yeah, those things don't even touch each other. They're so unrelated, which isn't the case. I would argue and analyze this and critically, that men and women have more in common than we have differences. But we don't focus on what we have in common, we focus on what we have differently. And so we kind of set up our perceptions as like, how are we set apart from each other? And that creates a hierarchy. I don't think you really see groups split apart from each other, that then it's like, okay, but they're separate but equal. Separate but equal, that doesn't work. We know that. And so a hierarchy comes into play. And usually that hierarchy, I think, develops based on social power. What kind of power people control in society. And so if we split gender into two groups, and then because they're different, there's going to be a hierarchy. The history of the world is patriarchy. And so men are going to be in a position of power, women are going to be in a position of less power or no power, depending on where you are. And I think that's a process of othering. And I think we don't necessarily think about that in terms of objectification and sexualization and what the media says about that. And I also say, I'm talking about media as if it's like the worst thing that's ever happened. Media can be really great too. We can do a lot of really positive things with media. But I'll say that for the end because that's what I'm going to get to. Why did I say that now? Okay. And I think othering happens really in two ways. I think it happens inwardly and I think it happens outwardly. Does anybody have like an idea of what an inward form of othering might look like? Stereotypes?
Yeah.
Okay. Meaning?
Just like things that you see differently about people, and then in turn can make you separate them from you.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of like building off that. I think it's like when you first see someone and you judge them, and you say like, oh, they're different than me, so you like automatically separate yourself.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
I think that a lot of times we see, like, we'll look at someone's personality and like see that theirs might be more desirables than ours.
Yeah.
So, like we'll separate our personality.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's kind of a trick question because I just made this up. I don't know if I made it up, but like I just kind of had this thought last week. So, but that's exactly what I was thinking with inward othering is we see ourselves as different and worse than somebody else, and so we kind of put ourselves in this like other box where it's like, well, we're not part of the in-group, we're not cool, we're not intelligent or funny. And I think the outward othering is exactly what you were saying, is that we see other people that way. So like we do the downward social comparison or the upward social comparison of like, oh, well, I mean, I'm not that great because I've inwardly othered myself. But I'm better than this person, and so at least I'm not in that situation. And I think in those cases we do a disservice to ourselves, and then we do a disservice to the people that we're othering and putting below us. And like I was saying earlier, I think really this is a violent act. It's not necessarily physically violent, but I think it can be used to justify physical violence. When we think about war and we think about conflict between people, does that conflict happen and you view the person that you're opposing as a human being, as somebody with a family, with thoughts and beliefs and a conflict of interest, like maybe they don't want to be in this conflict but they don't know what to do also? Or do you we kind of have to put them in this other category so that we can be violent towards them? I think being able to see each other as human is one of the key components to all of this, to making change in a lot of these areas. Because the truth is we live in a society in America where 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be victims of sexual assault at some point in their lives. And so for a lot of us, that's not even a statistic, that's a reality. We live in a very violent society. And I don't even want to get into the downward upward comparison of like, oh, well, we could live in another country where there's more violence and there's more abuse and exploitation. Why? Let's deal with our problems and let's help other people deal with their problems. Let's not compare our problems and say one is worse than the other, one is better than the other. We're doing okay because we're not as bad as somebody else. I really think there is a disconnect in our society that we don't understand. We don't really understand the extent to which we do harm to each other. those two videos that I showed you, the one made by Axe and the one made by Dove, both of those companies are owned by Unilever, which is one company. And so you have one company making a video where this woman is prostituting herself for body spray, and the same company making a video where they're showing you how images in media are distorted. If that's not a disconnect, I don't know what is. Like, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, write Unilever and say, hey, what's up? Did you guys see both of these videos? I don't know if you did. Because one of them I think is good and the other one I think is terrible. But they exist within the same organization. This past year, there was a group on campus who was doing fundraiser for human trafficking, and they put on this really huge Bollywood dance competition. It was really cool. And I was invited along with a friend to come and talk to the dance teams that were brought in from around the country. They were doing this big mixer, so all of the dance teams from different schools could meet each other and that sort of thing. And a friend and I were brought in to talk about human trafficking, just to give the dancers an idea of what the competition was about and what the money would be going towards. And part of the mixer was a pickup game. So they had one of the girls from the organization was sitting in a chair, and then each of the teams had to come up with a pickup line to try and get her to go on a date or whatever. And it was supposed to be funny and innocent, and it turned out to not be at all. It was really offensive. They were saying really vulgar things to her, and I was just sitting in the back okay, so in 5 minutes I have to get up and talk to them about exploitation, and this is going to be really awkward for everybody. And I think that's another example of the disconnect, because this organization on my campus that was trying to do something really good, it just got it was this weird thing where it was just it got ruined because of the culture that we live in, because other people came in and they didn't really understand. I don't blame them for what they did. I just think they didn't really understand necessarily how that was going to make the situation. But I don't think they understood that it was an act of violence, really, and that it was degrading to this girl from the organization at my school, who felt super uncomfortable the whole time. So it was really weird, but I think a good example of this disconnect that we see in our society. And so this brings me to pornography. I think that pornography in our country is inherently misogynistic, exploitative, racist, and violent. We don't always see it that way, though. I think the violence is rendered invisible because of the link to sexuality and because of the way that it's used and the way that it's marketed. We talked to a woman out in Boston 2 summers ago who's an anti-porn activist and scholar. And she really pointed this out to me for the first time, that the violence in pornography is rendered invisible because of the nature of the content. Because I've used pornography for a long time in my life, and it was a struggle that I went through and a difficult thing to walk away from because of the addictive nature of it. But it never occurred to me until she said it that it was violent. When we use pornography, the intended purpose is not to critique it and analyze it and try and pull apart meaning and all of that stuff. We watch it to get off. That's why people watch pornography. And so all of the things that are happening, all of the degrading terms used for women, all of the physically violent things that happen in it, we don't pay attention to those things, and so they kind of slip under the radar. And I think when you take a second to look at the content in mainstream pornography that exists right now and is easily accessible through any computer, it's incredibly violent and it's incredibly degrading towards women. It's humiliating, and I believe that it's violent towards women. Absolutely. I also think it's violent towards men. She also pointed out that the porn industry sees men as just these mindless consumers of not people who are capable of having healthy and respectful relationships, but people who just need to consume things all the time because that's what men do, and that's what we have to do. And so I think we don't talk about the violence in our pornography. People have a lot of excuses around it. I think one of the big excuses that we see is, well, it's not reality. It's maybe some people don't want to do it and that's fine with them, but if somebody's just at their house looking at pornography, what's the harm? It's not real, they're just doing it by themselves. And I would argue against that. It is reality, because real people are involved in pornography. Yeah? And real people are being exploited in pornography. It is not a pretty industry. California is trying really hard to pass health code laws around pornography because people aren't using protection and they're getting STDs, and the hours that they use for filming is just grueling and body punishing to the people performing in pornography. People who are being trafficked are used in pornography as well. I could not give you a statistic on the number or the percentage of pornography that uses, so sorry, but I don't have that. But I know that it happens. If you look at all of the pornography on the internet. You have a question?
When you're done talking.
Okay. When you just look at everything that's available, it's really clear that it's not all, you know, above the table. The pornography industry, I think in America, this statistic could be the world. Do you know, Andrew? 12 billion, is that in the US or is that
I think.
in the US?
Right.
Okay. Is a $12 billion industry in the United States?
9 billion.
9 billion? I was going to say, I think it's a $12 billion industry and we know where 9 billion comes from. But there's like a $3 billion discrepancy that it's like, where is that profit coming from and why isn't it being reported? Because these are businesses, apparently.
Which means that a quarter of that is somehow illegal or otherwise shady.
Exactly. Exactly.
So like a quarter of those being shown in pornography could potentially be illegal people or people who are not really wanting to do what they're doing.
Exactly. Exactly. And when you're consuming pornography, you have no idea. You have no idea if the person being depicted in that is doing that by choice or if they're being forced into it. Did you have something else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, there's an organization called Unearthed. If you've heard of them, they're really cool. They do a lot of doing the human trafficking. A lot of it begins with pornography for guys.
Yeah.
It's a big anti-pornography campaign. They do a bunch of videos just exposing what pornography is. Yeah, it's just Unearthed the way that sounds. But yeah, like they did a video where it showed they snuck in like where guys were making pornography. They didn't show pornography, but there was like a screen. And then, like, every 5 minutes, girl would have to get up and puke. And they're like, oh, she has to puke again. And she'd get up and puke and just sit there and dry heat because of how horrible it was. And they did a video where they would put guys in and they'd do that. And it was just really interesting to show that it's not just an hour of this wonderful orgasmic stuff. It's like, no, that's over hours of shooting where
Exactly.
they have to stop, take a break, the girl throws up, who knows what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not all pretty like you think it is. It's not an uninterrupted, sensual, whatever.
Exactly.
It's a long, hideous process.
Exactly. We see the final product. We don't see what goes into that. And I don't want to overlook the fact that pornography is really racist. It is incredibly racist. And if that sort of racism existed in any other form of media, there would be like, people would be in hysterics. Like there's no way that it would be allowed. Which I just think is incredible because it was another thing again that I didn't realize until you actually look at the content and what's there. The professor that we talked to went to a convention and was trying to talk to African American porn actresses about racism and pornography, and none of them would say a word to her because they knew that if they did, they wouldn't have jobs in the industry anymore, but they know that it exists. I think another thing we hear is that it helps people explore their sexuality. I'm going to come out and be honest, I'm a huge feminist. I was a women's studies minor in college, and I am all about people being able to find out what their sexual identity is and exploring that, and that it's not just a static thing, that I think it's culturally informed, I think it's biologically informed. I don't think pornography has anything to do with helping people explore their sexuality. I think if anything, it doesn't allow people to explore their sexuality. I think it oppresses sexuality because pornography is manufactured. It's not something that's naturally happening. It's not a relationship. It's manufactured. People put thought into what are we going to produce and then sell to people. There's nothing organic about it. It's all mechanic. It's all mechanic. And so I don't see how it helps people explore their sexuality. If anything, pornography is just a further representation of a lot of the destructive views that we already have. You don't see people being able to explore their sexuality in pornography. That's not what happens. And so I really just don't buy that it helps people explore their sexuality. I think there are 1.5 million better ways for people to explore their sexuality than pornography. So these really, I think, are kind of, if you're taking notes, these are my big thoughts on the effects of pornography in our society. I think that it reinforces sexism and violence and racism. I think that it's manufactured sexuality. I don't think that there's anything, it is. It's manufactured. It makes sex a commodity. It isolates people. It teaches us that relationship and relationship and sexuality happens apart from another person, kind of by yourself in a room, isolated. You know, except for the cases I know some people do watch pornography together, but that's not the majority of cases. And it perpetuates ideas of male privilege and female objectification. The idea that men are entitled to have an orgasm. One, in the content of the pornography. Two, in consuming the pornography and being able to do that whenever they want to. And I think the female objectification, that when we watch pornography, we have to dehumanize other people. That's another reason that it's reality, is because we dehumanize people in pornography. We have to, otherwise we wouldn't be able to watch it. You would never do the things that happen in pornography to somebody that you love, you know, to your wife or girlfriend or husband or boyfriend, or, you know. You would never be able to do that, a lot of the stuff that happens. And so we have to objectify people in order to consume it. And so I think that pornography really fosters a culture of exploitation where sex is a commodity. And violence against women is common, and it's so common that it's ignored. We don't talk about the fact that I was reading a book last year, and the author stated in the first paragraph that we live in a rape culture. And I was like, what? We what? Like, what do you mean by that? And it took me a while, and I had to digest that, but I mean, he's right. 1 in 6, or 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men. We live in a culture where that is so common that we don't really talk about it anymore. That in a way has become invisible. We don't talk about domestic violence, and we don't talk about abuse, and we don't talk about assault. And I know that those are sensitive topics, and there is a place and a time to talk about them. That, you know, I don't want to suggest that we just need to like throw all that out in the air and that we need to talk about it all the time, because it's really traumatic and painful for people. Yeah.
That's just like what we're here today is about the trafficking stuff, and the term is that they use is called sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, the rest of everybody, but when I think about sex, it's a positive thought.
Right.
They need to get rid of the term and put it what it is. It's rape trafficking.
Huh.
It's not sex. It's rape.
I'd never thought about that before.
You need to get rid of the 3-letter word and start using what it really is.
Yeah. I'm going to digest that, but I like that thought, and I don't disagree. I'll say that much. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of what you're talking about with the porn and the objectification,
Mhm.
there's a video I watched in a sociology class back in Ohio State Marion. It's called the Bro Code, and I would definitely recommend it if you can get your hands on it, because it talks a lot about like how women are objectified in the porn and, you know, what goes on, kind of what you said on the earth. So it's just like, it's kind of coming back in a strong relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There is, you know, I think about cultures of exploitation. I went to U of M for my undergrad, and I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but there's a group in Washtenaw County, the Washtenaw County Watchdogs, and they released an article recently reporting that the U of M kicker on the football team sexually assaulted a girl, I think in 2010. It was never reported. She never pressed charges. But as far as I know, there was also never any discipline from the university or from the football team as a result of that happening. And I first read about that in, I think, late August, early September. About the same week that I read that article, I got an email from the university with our updated sexual assault and misconduct policy. And I was just like, are you kidding? That you're going to send this out and also not do anything about the culture at our school? I mean, I understand that they are taking positive steps, and I'm glad that they sent that out to people. But there is a level of hypocrisy that exists within our culture. And that there are things that we will talk about and things that we won't talk about. We don't want to talk about privileged people who are doing these things. we often see that legislation isn't really happening for human trafficking reform and all of that being put in place, and it makes me wonder if the people who are in charge of putting legislation in place just don't want that kind of stuff on the books, especially as it relates to arresting buyers. Take that for what you will. In Grand Rapids, there are 4 strip clubs. In Lansing, there are 6. In Detroit, there are 25. Media objectification and sexualization, media dehumanizing, pornography, the effects of pornography in our culture. I also want to say we kind of live in this interesting time where we don't know what it looks like for a culture to grow up not exposed to pornography at this point, just because it's so widely available everywhere. We don't really have, I watched this TED Talk of a guy who did a presentation at the TEDx Glasgow event talking about the Great Porn Experiment. And it talked about all the negative effects of pornography. And he said one of the issues with studying pornography is there are no control groups, that there aren't any groups of men to compare users and non-users. And so that's just kind of a terrifying thought to me, and one that I embrace as I am complicit in that. But it's a terrifying thought that we are living in a culture where we don't know what it's like to not be exposed to pornography at such a huge level. And so then that plays out in the commercial sex industry, as it's called, and we can maybe talk about the use of sex in that phrase as well. And I'm talking strip clubs, escort services, which say that they don't involve sex, but spas. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of these places that we think that are legal right now. Strip clubs are legal. I know they have regulations about like how and what and all of that, but they're legal and they're hubs for trafficking. And so we have 4 in Grand Rapids, 6 in Lansing, and 25 in Detroit. And those are just 3 big cities in Michigan that I decided to pick and see, This was a result of one Google search. So if I had maybe wanted to do more exploring, you could find more things. But we also have Backpage. And I'm sure if you've been around the trafficking conversation for a while, you know that Craigslist at one point was a huge hub for people going to buy commercial sex or to buy trafficking victims, really, if we're just being honest, to buy trafficking victims. Craigslist eventually shut down their adult services section, so I don't really know how prevalent it is on Craigslist anymore. But as soon as Craigslist shut down, Backpage started up, which is essentially another version of Craigslist. And this is just a search that I did in their escorts section on Friday, October 4. And all of these came up. And this is just in the Detroit area. This is, these are all women women whose pictures are available online for you to call and set up a meeting. An evening of companionship? Probably not. Probably not. And so this is such an accessible way for people who are looking to purchase trafficking victims, for them to find that. And it's just out there. I had to do zero work to get this. And that's terrifying to me. In 2008, the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Assault or Sexual Exploitation did a study on deconstructing the demand for prostitution. And so essentially they interviewed just a bunch of sex buyers on so they looked at demographics, how old they were, and a bunch of information. And I think we have a lot of misnomers about what a typical sex buyer looks like, what profession he's in. And I know Dr. Williamson gave a list this morning of all of the professions in Ohio that they have of people who are purchasing sex. And I think that goes a good way to debunking a lot of the stereotypes. But I'll say personally, having met sex buyers, they're not monsters. I think that seeing them as monsters, one, it dehumanizes them. And you might not be comfortable with it, but I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about not dehumanizing people and then dehumanizing this entire group of people based on actions and habits that they have. It's not easy to think about having empathy for people who are purchasing trafficking victims, but if we don't, what hope is there for them? I don't think that there's any. And so in this study, they found that 62% had regular sex partners, and I think all of the people they interviewed were male, by the way, and that's typical, that male are purchasers of sex. I know that some women do, and men are involved in, are trafficked. Men and boys are trafficked as well. Most of them bought between 1 to 20 women. 53% bought sex once a month or more often than that. So they're frequent purchasers of sex, not just like one time they did it with a big group of guys. It was frequent that they do it over and over. The average age of first purchase was 21, college aged, which I think is interesting then when you compare it to the average age of first prostitution, which is 12 or 13. I don't want to get into that too much because I feel like we could spend an hour just talking about that. I think it really brings out two aspects of male culture. One of entitlement and the pornography thing, the results of looking at pornography. And we also see the male culture of having to be a guy, having to fit in, and part of having to be a guy is like being hypersexual and being aggressive and having control and power and all of that. One of the men in the study said that I wanted to pay someone to do something a normal person wouldn't do, to do something degrading who is not my girlfriend. So he just straight up admitted that, yeah, I've seen things in porn that make me want to go then and then buy somebody so that I can do these things that I wouldn't ever ask my girlfriend to do or wouldn't want to do to her. Another guy said, I was peer pressured. I didn't want to. I was afraid of catching something. My friend said, you a pussy, you a punk. And so what do you do in that situation? I think it's really easy to say like, oh, well, you know, your friend's just pressuring you, but like you don't have to say yes. But it speaks to this culture around masculinity. You know, it's prevalent. The case of the Duke lacrosse players who had strippers at their party. You know, this is male culture. I was at a wedding this past summer, and my good friend was getting married, and a bunch of his friends from his hometown were there, and we were meeting all of them, and it was a fun experience. One of them made the mistake of starting to tell me about how they would go to Canada to go to strip clubs and like look for women in prostitution. I was just like, you didn't know who you were going to talk to. That's weird. But it was a shock to me that this guy who's my age was just like so blatantly telling me all of these things that they're doing and had no reservations about it. He was like, yeah, you know, like it's probably like not a great thing to do. And I was like, no, it's definitely not a great thing to do. But it happens. It's not just like this idea that like some people somewhere probably live in this culture of men who buy sex. It's like, no, a lot of people. We all live in this culture. And so I think that to bring this around to trafficking, this all sets the stage for a culture where the most vulnerable members of our society are exploited at this, I don't want to say worst level, but at this horrific level of being stuck in trafficking, of being forced into prostitution. And it really, this society that we've created is a violence against women and children. And it's violence against men. We don't always treat each other very well. And I think we do a lot of disservices, and we're being told a lot of things that are disservices to each other. And I just want to quick hit a response to this commercial sex buying. Just a couple things that I think need to happen to reduce demand, because that's the focus of the organization that I'm with. Is we want to talk about things like this, talk about cultures of exploitation, and we also want to reduce demand, because like Dr. Williams said this morning, if you can get rid of demand, hopefully you can get rid of trafficking. And so buyers need to be arrested. That's just it. There needs to be repercussions for purchasing sex, and I'm not even advocating that they need to be put on a blacklist for the rest of their lives and just never look at them again. I'm not into the dehumanizing of people. I want to give them a chance to understand why what they're doing is wrong, because a lot of them probably have no idea. They see it like a lot of people see pornography, that it's just something that I'm doing over here and it's not really hurting anybody. Yeah.
Most of them actually think it's doing a service
to the girl.
She'd be on the streets, or she'd be being beaten, not giving her money.
Yep.
So most guys that I've talked to and that I've done studying on, they actually think it's a good thing they're doing. And when people ask me, Christian, why are you involved in this? Why would you're just going to kick a girl on the street? I mean, you're doing a good service that she's even in prostitution.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, at first glance, I guess it makes sense, but when you look down to it, it doesn't at all. But most people think they're doing a service to prostitute.
Absolutely, and it's really common for men to go back to the same woman over and over and develop this kind of like feeling of relationship, even though a lot of people admit that they go to purchase sex to avoid relationship, that it's like a one-time thing and they don't have to go back to it. And so I think the implementation of John schools is essential. And so John schools are not somewhere where people go to be taught how to be Johns. I want to make that clear, because sometimes there's confusion around that. John schools are a form of punishment. When people are arrested for purchasing sex, in cities where John schools are being run, they might have the option of paying a fine and going to a John school so that they don't have to go to prison, which I will say I'm in favor of. I don't really care if people go to jail or not. I would like for them to learn that their actions are destructive and for them to change those actions. Yeah?
I've done a lot of research on John schools, and I can't think of, what is it called when you re-offend something?
Recidivism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, first of all, really unreliable. They can't really measure recidivism rate because it's done under the radar.
Right.
But what they do know is, like, on a list of things that would deter Johns from recommitting, John schools are number 9 on the list. It does really little. It's just an education program.
It is.
It's a way to avoid a criminal sentence.
It is.
We have the FOP model, the first offender prostitution program. And we have this really great one that I really liked, and it was really comprehensive, and it talked to society, and it went into schools, and it did preventative work, got defunded because society is so disconnected.
Right.
So I think if we were to care about implementing John schools, you need to implement a lot more than just education, because it's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a really good point. That's a really good point too, that there are a ton of different ways of running John schools, and basically everyone that starts, they kind of do their own thing. And a sociologist that we talked to in Cambridge kind of broke it down into like 2 schools of thought. One is like a very feminist-led thought where it's very theoretical, and the other one is very it's much more practically based. So they'll tell you that you could get robbed if you're purchasing sex, that a girl's going to like pull a knife on you and rob you or something, or you're going to get hepatitis and you're going to bring that back to your home, or it's doing damage to the housing market in your community because you're bringing in street prostitution. I think a marriage of those 2 things would be a best model, where people are understanding the theoretical harms, the structural, not theoretical, the structural harms of the things that they're doing, but also the real risks, because there are real risks. It's not pretty on the streets. And so thank you, that's a really good point, that a lot of John schools are not super effective because of the way that they implement the John schools. I think that there should be rehabilitation opportunities, and I mean that for trafficking victims as much as I mean it for men who purchase sex. And I think something that you pointed to, I don't think I have it on here, educating men, especially men, but educating men and women when they're younger in schools, so that they understand the culture that they're stepping into, because this stuff, like I had no real concept of the damage of a lot of this stuff until I was like 20 or 21. And by that time, a lot of damage was already done. When my parents found out that I was looking at pornography when I was 13, they didn't tell me, they just told me that it was wrong and that I shouldn't do it. And they didn't tell me the reasons why. They didn't tell me the destructive effect that it was going to have on the way that I thought about people and about myself. And I don't blame them for that, because I don't know that they knew at the time either. That was what they had been told by other people, and so we passed that along. But if we have better information, we should pass along that better information to people so that they can make real, transformed choices, not just choices based in like shame of feeling like I've done something wrong. I'm getting really close to the end of my time here. I want to talk quickly about movement. I think this is all, now everybody is probably like depressed because our culture is terrible. Now we're going to talk about a couple really good things and ways that we can move towards a better society. Because I think in a lot of ways there's this huge stream moving in a bad direction. And it's really hard to move against that stream. If you're in a river with a really strong current, it's hard to walk against that. It's a lot easier if you have other people who are going with you and you're moving in that direction together. And so that's what I think we need to do, is we need to build a movement of people going in a different direction, because then you create that wake and people can step in. If they're not ready to be on the front lines, they can step into the back and kind of catch up when they're able to. I think that we need to talk about our insecurities and shame that come from the destructive cultural messages that we're receiving. It's hard, and it's not easy to face the shame in our lives. If you have not listened to Brene Brown's TED Talk on shame and vulnerability, I would highly recommend that you do so. They're transformative, and I think very good conceptualization of the effects of shame on our lives and the kind of bondage that keeps us in. We need to face our pornography addictions and support people as they choose a different path, because pornography is addictive. It releases dopamine and a bunch of other neurotransmitters and hormones in your brain that kind of rewire the way that you think and the way that you act. Most times, I don't think pornography addiction stands alone. I think it's connected to depression or anxiety or other life stressors. And so, you can deal with the pornography, but if you don't also deal with the depression that's underlying it, people are going to go back to it and they're going to relapse more and more. And relapse happens, and it's going to happen. I don't know of anybody who's tried to get over an addiction and has never had a relapse. And it's really hard when you relapse, but you need to support each other when friends are relapsing, and seek support when you're relapsing. And those are hard conversations to step into, I know from experience, but it's worth it. Grow the stream. So about the movement, grow, get people involved, bring people together. Try and move in a different direction. Look each other in the eyes. Humanize each other again. It's so easy to just look by people and not to see the humanity in their eyes. You can't look somebody in the eyes and not feel like they're a human being, right? Yeah.
Most annoying thing to me is when you're walking by someone on the sidewalk and
just stare straight ahead.
human, look at me.
Yeah, I moved to Detroit about a month and a half ago, and I don't know if you guys know this, but sometimes Detroit's a little bit of a dangerous city. And so when we were doing safety seminars, when I was starting school, they told us to look people in the eye when you're walking on the street, because you humanize each other in that moment. You become a human and they become a human, and it's a lot harder to mug somebody, I hope, when you see them as a human. Maybe not, I don't know, but I do it anyway. So, and I think we need to tell better stories. Media is a wonderful thing. We make videos. I mean, that's one of the big things that we do through Hope for the Voiceless, is we make videos and magazines, and I think that we just need to learn how to tell better stories, and not ones where we're degrading each other, and think about the messages that we're sending, and not just throw stuff out there so that we can make a bunch of money. I think that's all I got. This is if you go to the Hope for the Voiceless website, hopeforthevoiceless.org, you can find a copy of this. This is our fabric of exploitation, and it's really just a very simplified overview of kind of the way that we see media and pornography, commercial sex industry and sex trafficking, the way that they kind of connect to each other, and the way that it kind of moves down on the scale of everyone is involved with media. Fewer people are involved in the pornography aspect, fewer people with the sex trafficking, or fewer people with the commercial sex, and then fewer people with the trafficking. It kind of funnels down, but we are all connected on this fabric. It's not four tiers that are disconnected. It's one thing. This is our culture. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah,
What
30
was that
seconds.
website?
hopeforthevoiceless.org. I think we have a whole bunch of business cards. If people want to take a business card there, here they are. Yeah. That'd be great. And two, I wanted to print off a resource sheet because a lot of this stuff, I could give you citations for a lot of this information that I have and a lot of good resources to connect to learn more about some of these things because I just kind of have skimmed the surface of most of them. So if you guys want to give me your email address, I will send you resources. I will just send out a mass email with a bunch of resources on them. So feel free when you're on your way out if you want to do that. Or do you want to pass that around too? Okay. Do people have writing utensils? No. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I ran right up into... or comments if people want to talk.
Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being engaged and contributing.